it's not like Georgia was sitting here with one loss, or it's not like they were sitting here undefeated and being disrespected because the losses have been close. Fact of the matter is, I know they got the hardest schedule in the country, but it's a schedule that includes two losses in front of it for Georgia. So it wasn't coming out of nowhere. So for them to feel disrespected, that's fine. But really, from the cocktail party and the two losses, did we really have any reason to suspect otherwise that maybe Georgia was kind of right where they needed to be until they proved us otherwise?
Yeah, no, but for the Georgia people, and I'm talking about, I talked to Josh Brooks, the athletic director, who took a wild haymaker at the committee on Friday on our program, and Kirby and all the things that we've talked about. They just looked at not only the schedule, there was a little bit of poppycocking about Texas's schedule as well from the Georgia people. And I know that's verboten in the SEC to talk about one of your brothers, but I heard plenty of people say that that Texas has had the easiest SEC schedule since Tulane was a member in the 60s, and I
Wow.
think you can back that up. But it was about that Clemson game. I mean, they really are proud that they wrap their arms around playing Oregon and Notre Dame and schools like that. Even though last year, if you remember, they had the easiest schedule in the country. But uh, I feel like they have been right. And Kirby also talked about planning for the playoffs. I mean, this is in the off season,
Yeah.
and he said, he as much as said, we knew we were going to lose a game or two. We just didn't know to what degree. And he was planning for a 16, 17, 18 game schedule, not the predictable 12 game schedule.
Yeah. And look, I mean, when you look at Georgia's schedule from a year ago, I mean, it certainly was kind of on the flip side where they got the benefit of a pretty decent grid. But I hear what they're saying about Texas, but it goes into that point because we hear this all the time. It is funny because the SEC right now, top to bottom, the depth, they're kind of cannibalizing each other. I still don't think that's going to affect them too much come playoff Sunday. I mean, South Carolina is one of the hottest teams in the conference. They've got a slim chance, but they're probably going to be on the outside looking in. But there are years, Paul, because there aren't divisions anymore, because there's so many teams, it's kind of cyclical. There are going to be teams who get the luck of a pretty favorable draw, and it's what you do with that draw when you get it. And Texas is just taking advantage of it. Look, they played awful against Georgia. Georgia handled them pretty easily. But if you were the SEC and you're looking at some of these schools, like that's the schedule. Georgia benefited from it a year ago. I mean, they still got left out of the playoff, but they wouldn't have if it was 12.
Yeah, Georgia had Oklahoma on the schedule a year ago, not to go back to 23, but and then that got taken off. The schedules are uneven. Um, Everybody in the SEC, other than Texas and Oklahoma, would play either Texas or Oklahoma. That was the way they did it. And
Mm-hmm.
Georgia got the tougher end of that deal. Alabama has to go to Oklahoma this weekend as opposed to what Texas for example. So all those things matter. Ole Miss didn't have to play Texas either. So what I think was remarkable is though is that Kirby Smart just he was different. I've been around him a lot as you have, Matt, and the last couple of years you could feel the pressure of defending and going for the three-peat. He was back to being an underdog yesterday, as crazy as that. He was a 9.5 point favorite. I want before anybody jumps out of
Correct.
there. But he acted like an underdog, and he is masterful at that. And he, did that have anything with Carson Beck? I think Carson Beck just finally calmed down. He literally tried everything under the sun, and it worked. He got a couple of good catches too, and that's what he wasn't getting in the past. And one thing that also helped them was Tennessee.
Mhm.
They have a good running game. They have no passing game. We haven't seen it all year in the games that matter, and it simply escaped them last night. They had no way to come back.
And I don't want to say this disrespectfully for Tennessee, but I watch a lot of college football because we're there Saturday. So I've 16 hours every week, start to finish. And you start IDing teams where you're like, you know what? A loss is probably going to find them. This team lives dangerously. They're winning, but it's not impressive. And I felt like going into this game, that was kind of Tennessee's label. Yeah, they've got some wins. They beat Alabama. There's been some good stuff there. But to your point, the Josh Heupel high flying offense
Mm.
hasn't been that with Nico Iamaleava, who still throws a great football and who's still one of the best young quarterbacks in the country. But at the end of the day, you were looking at a team that was relying heavily on their running back, Dylan Sampson, a good defense, and hoping to get away with it. And it finally just wasn't enough.
No, and who knows exactly, what the condition of Nico was. I don't think it really mattered. I mean, the Georgia defense was different last night than it has been, but ultimately it wasn't a surprise, Matt. I mean, being around there, you could feel that train.
Yep.
I mean, it was. I'm not a handicapper, but had I been one, I may have made that one my lock of the year.
Yeah, because you look, we were talking about it all week on Sports Center, even getting ready for the game. The thing that we had said about Georgia since the Texas game, we hadn't seen that performance out of Georgia where they just grab someone like a boa constrictor and squeeze the absolute life out of them. They did it with Tennessee on Sunday. And so now you look at the SEC and you look at the standings, which I find to be one of the more entertaining storylines as we get to the final 3 weeks of the season. You look now at where we stand. Texas and Texas A&M are each 5-1 in league play, but one of them is going to have two losses because they play in the final week of the regular season. Then you have a cluster of 6-2 teams, or two lost teams in conference. This is conference record only. Georgia 6-2, Tennessee 5-2, Alabama 4-2, Ole Miss 4-2, South Carolina 5-3. That's the line of demarcation of anyone who has an opportunity to play for an SEC championship. So, Paul, when you go top to bottom, and I think metrically, if that's a word, Alabama has the best chance to play in the SEC championship game with two losses. But power rank the SEC for me. Where do we sit this morning after week 12?
Yeah, Matt, I think there's this debate, Alabama, Ole Miss, probably. I don't think Texas is the best team. They just don't look that part. They may end up the champion, but to me, Ole Miss at the moment looks the best. But even Ole Miss, and I don't want to sound like that guy, creating public relations from the SEC headquarters building, but
Never. We would
there are a
never
couple,
accuse you of that.
there are a couple of road games that, I mean, Ole Miss has a road game at Florida, and I know we'll get to Florida in a minute and LSU. Alabama's at Oklahoma doesn't sound pretty scary, but I tell you the game that I'm really interested in is A&M at Auburn. A&M is a terrible road team.
Yeah.
And they have just struggled on the road, and Auburn is just that team that's been hanging around all year, doing nothing, by the way, but capable of maybe scratching out an ugly win. Yeah, and I don't want to short sell Ole Miss at Florida, but uh, because I really don't want to spend 30, 40 minutes talking about the Gators, but I mean, a little bit dangerous too.